That's the minimum for foreign work experience. The minimum would be that letter. I normally like to include more. So I like to ask for contracts if they exist, and I make sure that they're consistent with the letter. I like to ask for pay stubs if they exist, but a lot of people don't have them, or prove that they've been paid. So we've gotten away with just the letter in many cases. Some provinces are more strict than that. I find that in Ontario, for instance, the letter might not be enough. I ask for tax documents sometimes. So, for instance, if you're in the U.S. and if you work in the U.S., you get something which is called the W-2, which is kind of like the equivalent of the T4 here in Canada. Some places, at the end of the year, there might be like a declaration of how much tax you've paid for employment. You can include things like that as well. Or sometimes people, like for the pension funds in some countries, they have to like declare the work that people have done, like their employees have done for a year. You might include that as well. So it always depends. We'll talk about self-employment experience in the next slide, but job letter at least, and then I do like to include as much as I can. If it's Canadian experience, you need to include the job letter. Most employers in Canada would have contracts, so I like to include contracts as well. And then I always include T4s, which they should have because they're been working as an employee, if that's the case. And I mean, well, for CC, they would have had to be working as an employee. And I like to include pay stubs as well for Canadian experience. And then again, we'll talk about self-employed people in a second. Because in some countries don't have accounting documents. Yeah, no, so I fully understand. And we've done some applications where all we have is the letter. It's the minimum, but if I can get more, I get more. But if that's all that we can get, that's all that we can get. And then obviously IRCC, they do their own research and they'll make sure, I mean, they might want to call the employer, they might want to look into that. But yeah, I understand that with some countries, that's the only thing that you can get. For education, should we enter details of the highest education or only we go to, if they go to high school too? So our practice at the office is that we only do post-secondary education. So we don't do high school. We do anything after high school, but we do all of them. So if they have a college degree, a bachelor's, a master's degree, and a PhD, I enter all of them. Even if only one of them was assessed, I still enter all of them into the profile. I would only enter high school if that's the only experience that they have, quite frankly. And they're likely not going to be competitive under express entry. And sometimes if I have a client who's really young and in the last 10 years of their personal history, it includes high school, I do tend to include high school as well as part of the education, just because it shows what they've been doing the last 10 years. There's different strategies to this. Some people say, I'm not going to include it in education, I'm just only going to include it in personal history. That's fine. We do like to include it in both. But those would be the only times where I actually include high school. And again, we'll talk about specific tips about express entry as we go. Back to FSW, there's no, and these are important. Again, I'm kind of highlighting this ones because I've seen a lot of people make mistakes or advise people wrong. There's technically no requirement the experience has to be obtained under a valid status. Technically, you could be in the US, you have been in the US for the last 10 years, working without status. You can document your work experience though, and the US is interesting because like you could be without status, but like you're still able to get like a, I think, social security number, and like they're still able to pay you, and the employer's still able to do all this stuff. So if you can, so technically you could still qualify for FSW, even if you have been in that, even if you have worked without status. Different for CC, and we'll talk about that. Canadian work experience count towards FSW. Sometimes people don't realize that. A lot of clients who are CEC clients, they're qualifying under both CEC and FSW because work experience for FSW is not only work experience abroad, it could be work experience in Canada as well. And this one I see a lot of people make that mistake too. They say, oh, you're a tradesperson, you're a carpenter. Well, that means that your program is federal skilled trades. Or they say, well, they don't qualify under FSW because they're a tradesperson. That's absolutely wrong. All of the people who qualify, all of the trades under the federal skilled trades program, they're NOC level B. They are not NOC level C or D. They are NOC level B. So they all qualify under FSW. FSW is NOC type C, NOC level A, NOC level B. So don't think that because you are a tradesperson, you won't qualify under FSW. It might be that they don't qualify under FSW because they don't meet the 67 out of 100 points or they don't have the language requirements. But get it out of your head that the experience of a carpenter or like a butcher, that's non-professional experience. It is. It is a NOC level B occupation, and I always find it interesting because I find like clients when you go to do talks like outside of, I mean, when you do talks to like people in general, I find people find it it's kind of like counterintuitive to them that like the government of Canada gives the same importance to someone who worked for 5 years as a doctor or as an accountant that someone who worked 5 years as an electrician. You get exactly the same amount of points, right? So it doesn't really matter. Someone asks if one worked as a customer service rep, so that would be a NOC C, yeah, that's correct, for 4 years, but has exposed to a supervisor role with acting as supervisor by doing main duties, and letter from the company will be accepted as NOC B. Well, yeah, it depends on what they did. If they were a customer service representative and like their main duties were that of a customer service representative, so it's not going to count. But if they were a CSR supervisor, then that would count. And then but you have to base it on what they actually did. Like we're very strict at our company that some people come and say, well, I'm a customer service supervisor, sorry, a customer service representative, or I'm a receptionist, but my employer is willing to say that I do whatever it takes. No, that's not how it works. We have to declare what you do. But sometimes we do find some people who have the title receptionist, but what they do is more of an administrative assistant or even an office manager. So or someone who says sales associate, but they're really like a supervisor at the place that they are. So we're able to qualify their experience as something that's professional. A lot of people sometimes change jobs. So you might have someone who worked 2 years as a CSR and then switch to a supervisory position. So in that case, in the express entry profile, you break the experience. The first 2 years under one NOC, that's not going to give you any points. But then once you switch to a supervisory position, then you do get points. Another question about self-employment. Client is a CA and it's a partner in an accounting company. The deed agreement said that the client is a partner and is remunerated with dividends. There's a letter from one partner that the client is working as accountant and auditor for 50 years. Would it be considered self-employment or could it be accepted as an employment? Yeah, if you're a partner at a company, you're probably self-employed. If you're not paid as an employee, if you're only receiving dividends, you're not an employee. You are self-employed. Okay. Even as an independent contractor, someone who has a contract to provide services to someone, and that happens a lot in Canada. And again, we'll talk about it at the CEC once we get to CEC. That is considered self-employment. You need to be on the payroll to be considered an employee. And if you own more than 50% of the company, the employer, even if you are paid as an employee, that will trigger to IRCC that you're also self-employed. And we'll talk about how to prove that. We'll talk about that an issue. It's not an issue with FSW at all. You could be self-employed. That's absolutely not an issue at all. It is an issue only when it comes to CEC. So that's the next point I had on my slide. Self-employment counts, but might be challenging to prove. And next slide, we're going to talk about what kind of documents we normally include to prove self-employment. Again, list of occupations. Since 2015, this doesn't exist. I always tell clients, like, if you hear a consultant or an immigration lawyer talking about the list of occupations, and they're using the or they talk about federal skilled worker and the list of occupations, they haven't opened an immigration book in the last 3 years. Or they really, I don't know where they're living because like they have no idea what's happening in the immigration world. No such thing. Those lists were banished with express entry. Some provinces still have lists, so that's different. Not a lot of the programs, but some of them do. But this whole list of occupations, and I'm in the list, a lot of clients say like, oh, I read the list and I'm in the list. You probably read something that has to do with a scam or like something that's really outdated. And then for FSW, you need to prove settlement funds unless you have arranged employment. Okay. So we have another question. Client spouse is a doctor, but not ready with her ACA yet. Should we put her highest education as high school and obtain ECA while the medical degree is evaluated and updated on the profile later on? No, what I would do in that case, obviously I'm assuming she's not the principal applicant because with high school she wouldn't be competitive and she might actually not meet the points for FSW. What I would do there is actually declare that she's a doctor, but then declare that the highest level of education is bachelor's in a professional or a profession that needs licensing, whatever is the wording. I don't remember it right now. But when it asks you, was this education in Canada? No. Did you obtain an ECA for this education? You just answer no. So she's not going to get any points for that. Once you get the ECA from the MCC, then you can change that and she'll get the 10 points or whatever it is spouse. So declare it. Just simply say that an ECA has not been obtained, and then you don't have to worry about the work experience of the spouse being over-declared because you the system's not going to award you any points for that.